Someone just held the door open for you. You said thank you. Automatic. Instant. You did not decide to say it. It simply came out. Now imagine that same moment, 50,000 years ago. The gesture exists. But the words do not. Not because ancient humans were rude. Not because they lacked the capacity for gratitude. But because the social world they lived in operated on a completely different logic. One where saying thank you was not only unnecessary. It was potentially offensive. This is the story of how gratitude works, why we express it the way we do, and what happens to a society when the rules around it change. Let us start with what gratitude actually is at its biological root. Gratitude is not a feeling that exists for its own sake. It is a social signal. A mechanism for communicating something specific to another person. What it communicates is this. I noticed what you did. I recognized that it benefited me. And I am aware that I now owe you something in return. In a modern world of strangers, where you may hold a door open for someone you will never see again, expressing gratitude costs nothing and signals goodwill. But in the world ancient humans lived in, gratitude operated under completely different conditions. You were not surrounded by strangers. You were surrounded by the same 30 to 50 people, every single day, for your entire life. Everyone knew everyone. Every action was observed. Every debt was tracked. Not in a ledger. In the collective memory of the group. And this changes everything about how gratitude functioned. Anthropologists studying surviving hunter-gatherer societies found something that surprised them. Explicit verbal expressions of gratitude were rare. Sometimes absent entirely. Not because these societies lacked warmth or care. They were deeply relational communities with strong social bonds. But because explicit thanks, in that context, carried an implication that felt wrong. If a man shares his meat with the group after a successful hunt, and another man says thank you in an explicit, formal way, what has he just communicated? He has communicated that the sharing was unexpected. That it was a gift rather than an obligation. That the sharer went above and beyond what was required. And in a hunter-gatherer community, that framing was an insult. The sharing was not above and beyond. It was the baseline requirement of membership in the group. You share because that is what members of this group do. Saying thank you implies it was optional. And implying it was optional was saying something dangerous. It was suggesting that the sharer had a choice not to share. And the idea that sharing was a choice was the beginning of hoarding. This is a crucial distinction that modern people often miss when they encounter it. The social enforcement of sharing in hunter-gatherer communities was not just a custom. It was a survival mechanism. In a world without refrigeration, without surplus storage, without markets or money, a hunter who kept his kill to himself and his immediate family while others went hungry was not being selfish in the modern sense. He was breaking the fundamental social contract that kept everyone alive. Need spoils quickly. A kill too large for one family to eat before it spoils was either shared or wasted. Sharing was not generosity. Sharing was rational resource management embedded in a social framework that made it obligatory. And because it was obligatory, thanking someone for doing it was strange. You do not thank someone for breathing. You do not thank someone for not poisoning the water supply. You do not thank someone for performing the most basic function of their membership in a shared society. You simply expect it. And if they fail to do it, you do not say please or thank you. You enforce consequences. The consequences for failing to share in many hunter-gatherer societies were severe. Social exclusion. Loss of status. In extreme cases, exile from the group. In an ancient world where a person alone could not survive, exile was effectively a death sentence. This created a system where sharing was not enforced by gratitude. It was enforced by fear. Not fear of judgment in the modern social sense. Fear of the consequences of becoming someone the group could not afford to protect. But the enforcement did not stop at sharing. It extended to the opposite problem as well. Boasting. If explicit gratitude was dangerous because it implied sharing was optional, explicit boasting was equally dangerous because it implied the sharer was better than others. Many hunter-gatherer communities developed a practice that researchers call leveling behavior. When a hunter returned with a kill, he was expected not to display pride or accept praise. The correct behavior was to minimize the achievement. To describe the animal as small, the hunt is lucky, the meat is poor quality. And the correct response from others was not enthusiastic gratitude. It was mild criticism. The meat looks tough today. You barely made it back. Next time you should aim better. This sounds cruel from the outside. But from within the social logic of that world, it was profoundly functional. It prevented any single person from accumulating the kind of social capital that could threaten the equality the group depended on. Pride in the kill could lead to the sense that the killer deserved more. Deserving more could lead to taking more. Taking more could lead to others going without. So the entire sequence was interrupted at the beginning by ritual deflation of achievement. Not because the group did not value the hunt, but because they valued the equality more. The meat was shared precisely because the social system refused to let the hunter's contribution become a debt that others owed him. So where does explicit gratitude come from? Why do modern humans say thank you at all? The answer is in what changed when humans stopped being hunter-gatherers and started being farmers. Agriculture changed everything. When humans began cultivating crops, storing food, building permanent settlements, the nature of obligation changed completely. Surplus became possible. Storage became possible. And with storage came inequality. Some families had more. Some families had less. The automatic sharing of the hunter-gatherer band began to break down. Because when food does not spoil in 3 days, the logic that makes sharing rational disappears. You can keep it. You can trade it. You can choose who receives it and who does not. And when sharing becomes a choice rather than an obligation, gratitude becomes necessary. Because now the person who shared actually did do something that was not required. They gave up something they could have kept. And that voluntary act deserves acknowledgement. Thank you is the acknowledgement of voluntary giving. It did not make sense in a world where giving was mandatory. It makes complete sense in a world where giving is optional. But something was lost in that transition. The hunter-gatherer system, for all its enforced equality and ritual deflation of achievement, produced communities where no one went hungry if the group had food. Not because people were more virtuous. Because the social system made hoarding structurally impossible and made sharing the default. The agricultural system that required gratitude also created the conditions for some people to have so much that others had nothing. And in that world, gratitude became not just a social lubricant but a class signal. The person who gives thanks is acknowledging that they received something they could not have provided for themselves. The person who receives thanks is acknowledging that they possessed something worth giving. And that asymmetry, repeated across a society, begins to look a lot like the social structures that still exist today. When you say thank you, you are performing a social act that has a 50,000-year history behind it. You are signaling that something was given voluntarily. That you noticed. That the social debt has been acknowledged if not yet repaid. It is a sophisticated piece of social technology. But it was built for a world where not everything was shared by default. Where some people had more than others. Where the act of giving required acknowledgement because it was genuinely optional. The world that hunter-gatherers built needed no such technology. Because in that world, the question was never whether you would share. It was only how much. Drop a comment and tell me which part of this changed how you think about saying thank you. And make sure you are subscribed, because next time we are going somewhere even stranger than this.